job thus far, respected by everybody. A great, great American.
Good morning and welcome to AM Joy, coming to you today from Los Angeles. Well, America, meet the new White House Chief of Staff. Tomorrow is the first day on the job for John Kelly, the former Department of Homeland Security Secretary, who's replacing Reince Priebus in the most powerful staff position in the executive office. Kelly, who along with James Mattis and H.R. McMaster is among the current and retired military leaders Trump refers to as my generals, he's facing the Herculean task of bringing discipline and order to a White House characterized by chaos and an undisciplined, uncontrollable president. Those trying to get a read on Kelly might look to his time as the head of Homeland Security. And during his brief tenure there, he presided over an aggressive immigration crackdown that has swept tens of thousands of undocumented immigrants into detention since Donald Trump took office. And Kelly has exhibited the one quality that Donald Trump prizes most in the people who work for him: loyalty to Donald Trump, which Kelly made clear while testifying before a House committee in February.
I work for one man. His name is, Donald Trump.
And joining me now are MSNBC contributor Malcolm Nance, former Pentagon official Rosa Brooks, MSNBC contributor Naveed Jamali, Republican strategist Noel Nikpour, and Jonathan Capehart of The Washington Post. And I'll turn to you here next to me, Malcolm. What can we glean from General Kelly's tenure so far about what kind of a chief of staff he would be?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that General Kelly must have done a really bang-up job for Donald Trump over at DHS. That immediate immigration crackdown, that instituting the travel ban with, instantaneous authority. I mean, they didn't wait a minute. They didn't even wait for paperwork to come down or orders. Trump likes that kind of aggressiveness. And I think he thinks, I have a Marine general. He's going to be here. He's going to instill discipline in this place, and he's going to do my bidding. So for the most part, I think Kelly himself is going to have a very, very interesting challenge.
Yeah, and I guess the question would be whether, Noel, this is his ideology at work, whether he agrees with Donald Trump's ideology, or whether he's really just sort of somebody who's going to do as he's instructed by his superior, in this case, his boss, the President of the United States. This is Kelly in January 31st press conference, and this is after the implementation of the first iteration of the ban on Muslim travel and the chaos that followed. This is General Kelly.
I knew he was going to sign an order about a year and a half or 2 years before he became the president-elect.
So, Noel, do you get from General Kelly that he essentially aligns with Donald Trump's ideology on things like the travel ban?
Yes, I think that, you're going to see strength and leadership out of Kelly. But Joy, here's the bigger deal on this, in my opinion. I think that, we all know that Kelly is a leader and he is strong and everybody likes him. But the thing of it is, did he take this position with, being the chief of staff with conditions or without? Because if he took the position without any conditions, then who knows if there's really going to be a change or a shift in the way things are done in the White House. Because you've got to look, Donald Trump, the White House is run like a circle, like a spoke, with Donald Trump here and different people all reporting to the president and nobody going through a gatekeeper. And I think that Kelly is going to demand to be the gatekeeper and the real chief of staff. So the big thing is going to be, did he set conditions before taking that position?
Well, that's a good question, Jonathan Capehart, because one of the issues with his predecessor, Reince Priebus, is, number one, he clearly didn't have the respect of the President of the United States, which is not a good thing for a chief of staff to have to deal with. But he also was defied by the incoming communications director. Anthony Scaramucci essentially said, I'm not going to even report to you. And he managed to get himself to report directly to the president. So do you anticipate that General Kelly is going to submit to that kind of an arrangement?
Nothing's going to change, Joy. I mean, look, to Noel's point about how, General Kelly could very well be a great gatekeeper, bring some order to the White House. But what good is a gatekeeper when the lion is already out of the gate? The President of the United States, not his staff, is the problem. And unless and until the president gives up Twitter, submits to full-on discipline that should come from a chief of staff, limits what he says to actual policy, to actual things that will drive the message. Does anybody remember Infrastructure Week? Does anybody remember Make America Great Again Week? Does anyone remember last week was supposed to be about American heroes. Those sorts of things would be driving the national conversation and driving national policy if you had a disciplined president of the United States. And unless General Kelly can rein in President Trump, all his efforts will be for naught.
Well, and Rosa Brooks, I think one of the sort of signals as to whether or not this is going to be a chief of staff who, traditionally the James Baker type of chief of staff could tell the president, that's a bad idea, Mr. President. This is a terrible idea. Don't tweet that, Mr. President. Don't say that. That hasn't been the case with Donald Trump. And let's go back and look at the way that General Kelly reacted in March. This is him on CNN. And this was back when Donald Trump essentially accused the former president of a crime. He accused former President Barack Obama, of wiretapping him in Trump Tower. This is how General Kelly responded to that.
Hovering over our discussion right now is the big headline of the day, this amazing charge from the President of the United States that President Obama personally ordered a surveillance of Trump Tower in New York during the campaign. Now, you're privy to sensitive information. Are you familiar with that? Do you believe that? You've worked with both of these presidents.
I don't know anything about it other than when I was sitting in the off studio here watching CNN. If the President of the United States said that, he's got his reasons to say it. He's got some convincing evidence that took place.
And Rosa Brooks, no, he did not have any convincing evidence that took place and, in fact, did not take place. Does that give you pause about whether or not General Kelly is going to be the kind of chief of staff who will stand up to the president when he does something like accuse the former president of a crime?
I don't think he will. I think everything he's done so far suggests that he is not going to be the guy who goes to the president and really tries to rein him in. I think he is going to be very good at trying to make the trains run on time in the White House with lesser staff, and he may be successful at that. But as Jonathan Capehart said, the fundamental problem in the Trump White House is Donald Trump. And no one can control him, frankly. And I don't think that John Kelly's even going to try. I think he knows it's useless. He's not going to try. To me, actually, the only thing that's a little bit more frightening than the idea of a disorganized, chaotic Trump White House, which is what we've gotten so far, is an effective, organized, unchaotic Trump White House. Because I think the only thing that's saving the nation from even deeper catastrophe is the fact that these guys can't get anything done.
Mm-hmm. It is an interesting point. Well, and I think one of the other things, Naveed, that I get the sense just from these last two hires, bringing in Anthony Scaramucci and the things that he said as colorfully as he said them that had to do with this mania about leaks. You get the sense that maybe the Kelly hire is along the same lines and designed to do the same thing, to sort of tamp down on the leakiness of the White House. I want to have you listen now to General Kelly. This is back on May 28th on Meet the Press, and he's talking about leaks, and he invokes the T word in talking about leaks. And this is talking about the UK investigation into the Manchester bombing. Take a listen.
It's totally unacceptable. And I don't know why people do these kind of things, but it's borderline, if not over the line of treason.
You believe it's treason to leak some of this stuff? You believe that's treason?
I do believe it is. I believe when you leak the kind of information that seems to be routinely leaked, the high level of classification, you are telling
And what was leaked on this Manchester bombing, you believe maybe even meets say treason?
I think it's darn close to treason.
Now, Naveed, he was specifically talking about information that leaked out from the administration about the investigation into the Manchester bombing. But do you get the sense that maybe the reason he's being brought in and that Trump is bringing in one of his generals is because he wants to shut down the leaks in the West Wing?
I think that's a very good point. And look, it just piggybacking on what Jonathan is saying. When you're a leader wants to surround herself with people that can give wise, sage, and objective counsel. It seems like Donald Trump is not going that route. He seems instead to want to surround himself with people that just tell Donald Trump he's great and are enforcers. That's not what you need to make an objective decision when you're doing policy, when you're looking at things where there's no conceivable way you can have an in-depth understanding. You're turning to the people who understand the issues. And if those people are just going to say, hey, your decision is right, and not question you, not push you to make the right decision, how are we going to be a better country? Look, Joy, at the end of the day, we've had, since this administration has taken office, we've had a list of people that have meant to be moderating voices in the White House. And the last one was Jared Kushner. And my goodness, look where that has gotten us. Unfortunately, I have a lot of respect for General Kelly, but I don't have high hopes for what he's going to be able to accomplish and the wall he's going up against.
Yeah, and well, apparently he's for the wall. That's one thing I think Trump likes. I don't know if he's for the wall, actually. Let's actually to roll that back, because it's actually the opposite of that, Malcolm. There was a piece Friday in the New York Times about Kelly and sort of the things he doesn't agree with Donald Trump on. And the wall actually is one of them. And it says, this is a little excerpt from that. He was not always in lockstep with Mr. Trump's policies, publicly questioning the need for a full border wall with Mexico and calling Russia a threat to the United States as the president signaled a friendlier approach to Moscow. The chances that General Kelly can do what none of the intelligence services, all 17 of them, have been able to do, which is to convince Donald Trump that Russia is a threat to the United States and not a friend. What do you think of his chances of being able to do that? And clearly, he's not for the wall. Maybe he can talk him out of that, too.
Well, General Kelly's opinions to himself about whether he's for the wall or not, even as they were coming out of DHS, they won't matter at all once he gets into the Oval Office. I mean, he is going to start acting like a Marine general when he gets there, because it's been made very clear that Donald Trump is the decision maker, and whatever he says goes, and you will repeat what he says on national television and salute smartly and go about to doing his business. He may offer his advice, but we've seen what happens to everyone else who offers sage advice. Yeah. They are immediately drummed out as soon as they cross Donald Trump's, very, very low threshold of, his great opinion of himself.
Yeah. And Noel, that essentially leaves one more person willing to repeat the party line or repeat whatever it is that Trump once said, but with more stature and with some, bars on his chest. But, okay, what does that mean for the Republican Party? Because they're facing a White House that's already said they want to publicly distance themselves from the party. They've kicked out all of the RNC folks. Is the Republican Party proper concerned that essentially this White House is going to become a satellite unto itself?
I think that they're hoping, since Trump looks at Kelly as almost a peer. I think that the key word here, unlike Reince, is the fact that Trump didn't really, I don't really think had as much respect for him as he does for Kelly. So maybe we can get something done. But the thing is this: if you've looked at past administrations, look at Bill Clinton. It took him about a year and a half before he got his chief of staff grooved down. And you remember when he flew Leon Panetta to Camp David, and he and Tipper and Al Gore and Hillary all got together and decided that, really Leon Panetta was going to be the guy. So it took him about a year and a half. It took Jimmy Carter 2 years before he got his chief of staff right. So I'm hoping what we're seeing is a good fit with Kelly, and we can start seeing that we're getting some things done and some organization, because the RNC, we Republicans, we need that, because what's happening, Joy, is the narrative is being turned around to the chaos and the circus at the White House instead of the very important issues that are going on.
Right. And speaking of those important issues, just a few of the things that are taking place while Donald Trump is up tweeting at 4 o'clock in the morning his various thoughts. You've got Iran, you've got Iraq and Syria, the civil war there, of course, ISIS. You've got the North Korea situation with missile tests taking place. You've got hotspots all over the world. All of this is taking place while Donald Trump, the sort of circus, is in town 24 hours a day. Rosa, you said that in some ways the circus is probably keeping the American people from a lot of sort of bad policy decisions. But are you concerned that Donald Trump, because he loves to surround himself with military people, he loves to surround himself with generals, that he might see some sort of national security exercise as a way to get the country behind him?
Yeah, I've always been concerned about that. I think Trump is extremely erratic. I think Trump wants people to be paying attention to him and loving him, and I think he will do whatever he thinks it takes, which often turns out to be wrong. But yeah, I mean, it's a dangerous situation. We have someone who, quite frankly, I think is out of control, who has literal control over America's nuclear weapons and the ability to cause all kinds of havoc. So far, the havoc he's caused has been mostly visited on the most vulnerable people in the United States, such as immigrants, foreign refugees, etc. But his ability to cause havoc overseas is significant. It wouldn't surprise me at all, and I'm just hoping that 2018 comes along as quick as it can.
And Malcolm, I think there are a lot of people, particularly, liberals, but Democrats, and even some Republicans that I've talked to that are concerned that this is a president who wants sort of the trappings of an authoritarian leader, that he wants to surround himself with generals. He was delighted. I mean, Emmanuel Macron was able to easily delight him by showing him a military parade. He sort of talks favorably about the way Duterte in Philippines brutalizes people he thinks are dealing drugs. It is a concern that Donald Trump is now bringing a general right into the West Wing, because he it gives him something, and the something feels authoritarian.
Well, I think that's correct, and I think that authoritarian reflex of his, where Saddam Hussein and Kim Jong-un, people he admired in the campaign, he feels that generals give him that steel in his back and will get things done for him that he chooses to do. He does not want to fit the role of a president of the United States. He wants to be a CEO of a Trump corporation, and he's going to put people behind him that will crack the whip. So that being said, when decisions that are going to be or could be intensely controversial or even dangerous to the United States. I mean, this North Korean missile test that they've been carrying out, if Donald Trump gets into his head that he's going to burn that program out of the ground with perhaps a nuclear weapon, well, these generals are going to have to be the ones that are going to have to explain what the consequences of that, because his consequence management skills are null.
Is Kelly the guy who's going to say yes, sir, or is he the guy who's going to say don't do it?
He may have to be the guy that tackles him.
Wow. All right, Malcolm Nance is going to be back. Rosa Brooks, Naveed Jamali, Noel, Nick Poor, Jonathan Capehart, thank you guys very much. And up next, Donald Trump's solution to the North Korea problem? We'll insult China, because of course. Stay with us.
Kim Jong-un is dangerous because he's unpredictable, and his technology in developing this missile system, which might hit the U.S., the mainland, is advancing. And we don't appear to have a strategy to deal with him. And he's taking advantage of that.
In response to North Korea's second recent test of an intercontinental ballistic missile on Friday, the U.S. has flown bombers over South Korea in a show of force and conducted another test of its THAAD missile defense system in Alaska. North Korean state-run television aired what they said was video of the ICBM test on Friday, with leader Kim Jong-un in attendance. NBC News has not independently verified this video. Some experts believe the missile could be capable of reaching the U.S. mainland and several major cities, quite possibly as far east as Chicago. Joining me now is Lawrence Wilkerson, a retired U.S. Army colonel and former chief of staff to Secretary of State Colin Powell. And Colonel Wilkerson, thank you so much for being here. How much of a threat is North Korea of actual conflict with the United States, and how much of this is posturing on the part of Kim Jong-un to try to get attention and get concessions from the world?
Joy, a lot of it is posturing. This is the way all three of the Kims have acted on the international stage. But let me say this. If someone wants to watch what ought to be done about North Korea, watch the interview between Secretary of Defense, former Secretary of Defense, Bill Perry, and Senator Bernie Sanders on Bernie Sanders' radio show. Just Google it. Bill Perry presents the best alternative for the United States, presents a strategy, presents a plan for dealing with North Korea, and it's the right one. Now, he was there on the peninsula in 1994. I was there, too. We were as close to war with Korea as we've been since the Korean War, and we diffused it, and we diffused it by negotiating. We diffused it by not brinksmanship, but negotiating, and that's what we need to do now.
And what does Kim Jong-un want? What would we be negotiating for?
Bill points it out clearly, and he is absolutely right. He wants his regime to stay in power, and he's not about to do anything to jeopardize that. So that means deterrence works, but it also means you have to sit down and negotiate, and you have to be willing to give something too. A good example would be we would trade his cessation of ballistic missile testing. He'd stop it if we would stop exercising on the peninsula with the South Koreans, at least for an interim period. These are the kinds of things you have to do when the situation is as dangerous as it is on the peninsula.
So then I take it that you may think it was not wise to do this THAAD missile test that we just did, because the U.S., in addition to that, has deployed THAAD in South Korea to guard against North Korea's shorter-range missiles. This is according to NBC News on Friday, angering China, which says the system's powerful radar could probe deep into its territory. Moscow and Beijing, in a joint statement earlier this month, called Washington to immediately halt the deployment of THAAD in South Korea. So do you think that the current strategy of sort of flexing our muscles and showing off this THAAD system is wrong?
It's fine to do that for an interim period. It's fine to do that for a short time. Each side shows the other side it means business. But then ultimately you've got to sit down and talk. And I don't see anybody but the South Koreans, God bless them, actually thinking about that. What I see is more bluster, more Trumpism, if you will, on our side, more amateurism. And that's going to lead to a catastrophe. There are over 200,000 American citizens in the Seoul area alone. Half of Korea's population is in Seoul. It's in danger. We'd beat North Korea. There's no question about it. We in South Korea would beat North Korea, but it would be a Pyrrhic victory. It would be a disaster for the South.
Oh, my goodness. Well, you said Trumpian, and so I have to give you the latest missives from Donald Trump's Twitter account. Just this morning, he tweeted, "I'm very disappointed in China. Our foolish past leaders have allowed them to make hundreds of billions of dollars a year in trade, yet they do nothing for us with North Korea, just talk. We will no longer allow this to continue. China could easily solve this problem." What do you make of that?
This shows that Donald Trump has absolutely no understanding.
Last night. Sorry, that was from last night, not this morning.
Yeah, no understanding of Northeast Asia, no understanding of international relations in that area. Nobody wants a unified Korea, and I'll add that to the United States. The United States doesn't want a unified Korea, too. China doesn't want a unified Korea. So the way you deal with that is you find out what China wants, you find out what we want if you're Beijing, and you negotiate in good faith with the North Koreans to produce that condition. If you can't do that, then you're marching toward one of the bloodiest conflicts that you can possibly imagine in Northeast Asia. One that might have ramifications wider than the peninsula, too. That's bad, because you've got Japan, you've got China. You might have a bigger war than you think you're going to have if you start one on the peninsula. So negotiate, sit down and negotiate, and understand the other side's motivations before you do. That's out of the ken of possibility for this bunch of amateurs.
Yeah, and part of the problem, too, is you have this depleted State Department that's not even at full staff. How are they even able to deal with this? You have not only this, but you've got the Pakistan situation where the prime minister was ousted. You've got what's going on in Jerusalem, which, should be getting a lot more airtime on American television because those clashes in the old city are escalating. How is the State Department, you worked for General Colin Powell, how is the State Department even handling this without a full staff?
We're dismantling the State Department. I think Rex Tillerson has been given that directive by the President of the United States to, in essence, dismantle diplomacy. There's an old theorem of international relations, Joy. It's called conservation of enemies. Simply stated, it means you don't want any more than you can handle. Look at the lineup we have right now, from China to Russia to Iran to North Korea to ISIS. Look at the lineup we have, and look at the amateurs we have in the White House in order to confront them. And they won't come in ones, they'll come in twos and threes. This amateur hour in the White House is the most dangerous thing America has faced, and it's going to face it, I guess, for another 3.5 years.
Yeah, the Trump administration has added a new person to the White House. Donald Trump loves to surround himself with generals. He's now added a third to his administration as chief of staff, General Kelly. What do you make of this strategy of putting a Marine general in that chief of staff position and Donald Trump's sort of general penchant to sort of surround himself with military men?
I think it's a sign of Donald Trump's lack of confidence in himself when he says things like "my generals" and so forth. And I'm really frightened by the aspect of so many military men having this kind of position within the national security decision-making process. It's dangerous. And it says something about Donald Trump. It says that he does not trust the rest of the bureaucracy, including the State Department and diplomacy. So this is a very dangerous situation. Let me just remind your listeners, too. I'm going to say this flat out. I have a lot of respect for McMaster and for Kelly and for Mattis, but let me tell you something. We haven't had a general in the United States Army, with one exception, H. Norman Schwarzkopf, who's won a war since 1945. So this current crop of generals in the White House is a product of that system in our armed forces. I'm not at all confident, as I said I was before, mostly being sort of hopeful. I'm not at all confident that this is a positive development at all. And if John Kelly doesn't get a control on that White House, on Trump's tweeting, on people like Jason or like Scaramucci and others who are Bannon, who are influencing the president, if he doesn't get a handle on that, then all he is an ambitious general, and we can take what we want from that.
Wow, sobering words from Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson. Sir, thank you very much for being here. Always good to talk to you.
Thanks for having me, Joy.
Thank you. And coming up, investigators are pushing to find out exactly what Jared Kushner's meetings with Russia were all about. Details on that next.
Let me be very clear. I did not collude with Russia, nor do I know of anyone else in the campaign who did so. I had no improper contacts. I have not relied on Russian funds for my businesses. And I have been fully transparent in providing all requested information.
This week, Jared Kushner was in the House and the Senate in separate closed-door sessions to discuss his contacts with Russians during the campaign, including the June 2016 meeting with a Russian lawyer who was offering the promise of damaging information on Hillary Clinton. In a lengthy written statement, Kushner admitted to his attendance not only at that meeting, but at 4 meetings with Russian officials during the campaign and transition, all of which he had failed to mention in his original security clearance application. Now, he claims to have not known the subject matter of the June meeting set up by Donald Trump Jr. because he only partially read his brother-in-law's email. One wonders how he missed the subject line of those emails, which was Russia, Clinton, private and confidential. Kushner's explanations aren't nearly enough for House Democrats, who this week continued to push to have his security clearance revoked. I'm joined now by Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell of California, ranking member of the CIA subcommittee of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. And Congressman, do you find it credible that Jared Kushner opened an email that said Russia, Clinton, private and confidential, but did not know the subject of the meeting before he showed up?
Good morning, Joy. I don't think there's any clickbait that's more tempting than private and confidential. So I think what we are seeking to understand is, does it make sense that the email he did not read was the one that had their opponent's name in it, Clinton, a foreign adversary's name in it, Russia, said private and confidential, and then went on to offer damaging information from the Russian government against Hillary Clinton. But Joy, the other part of that statement that you alluded to with Jared Kushner, he said that the email he did read was an October 30th email, 10 days before the election. You can imagine how busy he must have been then, which was essentially a spam email saying that Russians had Donald Trump's tax returns and that Kushner better pay 52 Bitcoin, otherwise he was going to, have to see those exposed. So, did he not read the one that said Clinton, Russia, private and confidential, and the one that he did read was what most people would probably see as spam? I think we have to test that, and right now it doesn't really add up.
And last week, Ari Melber, my colleague here on his show, had on a woman named Elizabeth Spears, who used to work for Jared Kushner, and asked her about this idea if he was the kind of person who would show up to a meeting without knowing what it was about. Take a listen.
I find it implausible that he would show up to a meeting without knowing what it was about. He's a busy guy. In my experience, every meeting we had was planned and scheduled, and he always had an agenda for it.
When he showed up to meetings with you, with his business, he knew what they were about.
Yeah. I don't find it credible that he had no idea what these meetings were about.
And given, Congressman, that you also had the campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, invited to the meeting, as well as Jared Kushner and Donald Trump Jr., it doesn't seem that anyone is sort of buying that explanation. Can you just tell us, what have you been able to glean about what Jared Kushner's role in the campaign was at that point? What was he actually doing for the campaign?
Joy, I actually found Jared Kushner to be a very bright, worldly, thoroughbred type individual who was quite meticulous in his role on the campaign. And actually, if you read his statement, he also, if you believe him, was in charge of everything from scheduling to fundraising to the digital operation. So I actually take him at his word and, believe those around him that he was quite involved in the campaign. He wasn't a novice. He wasn't way in over his head. He brought a different experience. He certainly didn't have political experience, but he brought a different experience to the campaign. So it's just hard to imagine that, in June, right before the president goes out and says that there's going to be new damaging information about Hillary Clinton, that this meeting somehow was not seen or observed by Jared Kushner when he read the email.
And the digital operation piece, I think, I find very interesting personally, because that would be the operation that was sort of cooperating in spreading memes about Hillary Clinton, in getting, online, sort of adherence to Donald Trump to know information about Hillary Clinton. Do you find it interesting to sort of explore whether that digital operation was receiving and disseminating some of the information that was coming in through those Russian hacks?
It's too early to tell right now, but part of our investigation is to understand what data was extracted from the DNC, from John Podesta's emails, and how it was weaponized through social media, through fake news, through trolls that the Russians were using, through RT and Sputnik, their state broadcasting corporations, and whether there was a link between the Trump campaign and the Russians who were hacking it. We know that Roger Stone, for example, was receiving this information from Guccifer 2.0. He was in contact with them, at least, about what would be coming, and Guccifer 2.0, as our intelligence community says, was a Russian cutout. And so we want to understand, was this unwitting behavior by Roger Stone, or was it part of a coordinated effort to work with the Russians?
And let's go now to Jared Kushner's sort of belated disclosures about his assets. The Washington Post reported in July 21st that he made a revised filing in which he revealed lots of assets he'd forgotten about before. The new disclosure released by the White House detailed more than 70 assets his attorney said he'd inadvertently left out of earlier filings. You said that you thought him to be a meticulous fellow, somebody who's a bright fellow. Why does he seem to be he seems to have such a difficulty remembering meetings, filling out forms, and remembering what assets he has?
This seems to be the pattern around almost all things Russia or conflicts of interest that the Trump family has, which is to deny that they ever existed, and then only once confronted with them by overwhelming evidence from congressional investigators or the press, they acknowledge them and then try and downplay them, and then they put them forward in filings that are required by the government. But Joy, I also want to say that I see the president going to a very dangerous place when it comes to Russia. And I think the June 9th email took all this constellation of contacts and put him in better perspective for us as to what was going on. And the president now has gone from no Russia, no collusion, to essentially, well, that's politics. That's what happens in campaigns. And I think that's because the evidence is so overwhelming that they were willing to work with the Russians. And that's why they're trying to deflect, distract, and not disclose.
All right. And who else would you like to talk to in this committee? You guys have talked to Jared Kushner. Who else would you like to see come in front of you?
Don Jr., certainly Paul Manafort, General Flynn are individuals of high interest. And, we just want to understand, were all of these contacts that they had with Russians, whether it was the government or business individuals and oligarchs, were they just coincidences that they happened to occur at the time that Russia was interfering in our elections? Or was it a convergence of deep personal, political, and financial relationships that worked with Russia as they tried to undermine our democracy? And we're not there yet. It's too early to tell, but we are making progress, Joy. And I will credit Mike Conaway, the chair on the Republican side. We've interviewed more witnesses in the past few weeks than we have in the past 6 months, and that's a credit, I think, to this committee being back on track.
All right. I want to just ask you, before I let you go here, to get your comment on the sort of news of the day. General Kelly coming in as chief of staff to Donald Trump. What do you make of Donald Trump surrounding himself with so many generals?
Well, Joy, we're rooting for General Kelly because the president right now is unfocused. I hope that General Kelly will explain to Mr. Trump the words Yalta, Malta, Casablanca, opportunities where American leadership were on display, working with allies to confront the greatest crisis in the world, which is World War II. We are approaching a very big crisis with North Korea, and we need this president to start stitching together allies and acting like the president.
All right. Congressman Eric Swalwell, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
All right, coming up in our next hour, the media's obsession with Anthony Scaramucci and your moment of Maxine. More AM Joy after the break. Donald Trump may have a tough time saying you're fired himself, but in just 6 months, his administration has still seen lots of pink slips. National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster this week fired his department's top Middle East advisor on Thursday, just one of several staffers hired by his ousted predecessor, Michael Flynn, that McMaster has shown the door. But one Flynn holdover has proved more durable than the rest. Ezra Cohen Watnick, the 31-year-old senior director for intelligence programs, was on McMaster's list, but it didn't happen. And that's because Donald Trump himself told McMaster that Cohen Watnick was staying put. The question, of course, is why? Rosie Gray, White House correspondent for The Atlantic, tackled this question in her piece, The Man McMaster Couldn't Fire, and she joins me now. Rosie, thank you very much. I really enjoyed reading your piece. Because this has been a question of mine as well, is that, with Michael Flynn turfed out of the administration allegedly for lying about his contacts with Russia, and that's the official reason he was fired. How is it that one of his chief deputies, Ezra Cohen Watnick, is still there?
Well, one thing that happened is that Cohen-Watnick was able to, basically form relationships with powerful allies in the West Wing. The people who really intervened to save his job were Jared Kushner and Steve Bannon. And they appealed to the president, who then told McMaster, no, he's staying.
And so we know that Ezra Cohen-Watnick has attempted to help Donald Trump out when it comes to getting out of the Russiagate affair. Two White House officials helped give Devin Nunes, who was the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, reports that they tried to use to allege this unmasking was illegal, that there were laws broken in supposedly, quote, wiretapping Donald Trump in Trump Tower. And one of the people who did that was Ezra Cohen-Watnick. The other was Michael Ellis. Has there been any sort of repercussion for him doing that?
Well, look, I mean, I would just say that, part of why I did this piece was trying to sort of unwind the very murky, complicated unmasking story. And I still think that it's not 100% crystal clear exactly what Cohen-Watnick's role was. One official who was familiar with what happened said that basically he was asked to do a kind of routine review of unmasking procedures, uncovered this, passed it off to someone in the counsel's office, and that was basically it. So in terms of repercussions for what happened, I mean, clearly there haven't been any because he's still in his same job.
Yeah, he's a young guy, 31 years old. He's a senior director for intelligence programs. He used to be at the Defense Intelligence Agency with Michael Flynn. What are his qualifications from the job? You have a quote in your piece in which you spoke to somebody who said, I didn't know Ezra from Adam. That's a former intelligence officer who's a member of the NSC. You also spoke with a White House colleague who's known Cohen-Watnick for years, who described him as someone who'd seemed like a natural choice for the job in 5 to 10 years, but not now. What are his qualifications?
Well, basically, Cohen-Watnick served, in the DIA for most of his career, which has not been a very long career so far. He had one sort of overseas tour in Afghanistan that did not go particularly well, according to my reporting. I think a lot of people in the intelligence community were very surprised to see someone of his age and experience level picked for what's a very important job, liaising between the White House and the intelligence community. So in terms of his qualifications, I mean, look, everyone who works with him, who I spoke to, said that he's very smart. He's very, he's very assertive. He does know what he's talking about, but I definitely think that it has rubbed other people in other intelligence agencies the wrong way to have to work with him.
Yeah, and I mean, that's those who would talk to you, because one of the sort of really intriguing sort of things about your piece was this thing about no one wanting to talk about Ezra Cohen-Watnick. The one thing about Ezra Cohen-Watnick is apparently you don't talk about him. And you ask people around, people get defensive. This is from your piece. Some profess not to know him or ask why anyone would want to write about him. Others simply refuse to discuss him. You quote Michael Ledeen as saying, I won't talk to any journalist about Ezra. And he's a Flynn confidant who knows Cohen-Watnick well. Is it one of your hit pieces? Asked Bannon, Steve Bannon, who didn't respond to further requests for comment. Why is it that people are so reticent to even talk about him?
Well, people are. I found people to be unusually protective of Cohen-Watnick, and to tell you the truth, I don't know if I completely answered the question of why that's the case. But there's definitely sort of an unusual level of secrecy surrounding him. It is true that he's an intelligence official, and so these people tend to operate, in sort of a more secretive manner. But I definitely think that that the reticence that I found on the part of many people to talk about him struck me as unusual. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you get the sense that he's still in touch with Michael Flynn?
I do not know the answer to that question.
Yeah. And what was the relationship between the two men? How far does it go back? Is he somebody that knew Michael Flynn in your reporting before he got to the DIA with him?
So a lot of people that I spoke with were under the impression that he had known Flynn at DIA. One person who was, had very close knowledge of how this actually happened said that, in fact, they didn't meet until last year during the campaign at a coffee meeting that was arranged by Michael Ledeen's wife, Barbara. So who knows Ezra from growing up, Ezra grew up outside of Washington. And so it appears that actually the relationship might date back to, more recently than people seem to think.
Yeah, and just to be quite blunt about it, did you speak with anyone in the intelligence community that is concerned about his relationship with Michael Flynn and that it could be ongoing, given what Michael Flynn has been up to in terms of his contacts with Russian officials?
I see where you're asking. In terms of the people that I spoke with who are intelligence people for this story, I wouldn't say that specific concern was necessarily raised. I think that the concern that some people raised was that they were worried about someone who seemed to be a sort of more partisan and political choice chosen for sort of his loyalty to one person in this very important job.
Yeah, and I guess that's the point, is that if his loyalty was specifically to Michael Flynn, then who is it that's protecting him in his job now? Were you able to determine that?
Well, like I said, I mean, Jared Kushner and Steve Bannon intervened to save his job. In terms of, you know, why he's still there, despite the fact that McMaster has obviously been able to fire other people that he wanted to fire, you know, the fact of the matter is there was an attempt to fire him. It wasn't successful. And once something like that happens and the president himself sort of intervenes to save your job, you know, it's you do become a little bit sort of unfireable.
Yeah.
So in terms of...
Go on.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that, you know, you now have Michael Kelly coming in. There's a sense that these generals are all sort of allies, McMaster and Kelly. Did you get any sense, and this may be after, this is after your story already came out, obviously, that Kelly might be able to help McMaster make the decisions he wants to make about his own staff?
Well, I mean, there is, you know, I've been talking to people about what, you know, what Kelly might mean for McMaster in general over the last day or so. And basically, you know, there's two schools of thought. One school of thought is that this will sort of empower McMaster, that the generals will be able to kind of work together, and this will be good for McMaster. The other school of thought is that Trump, who has sort of clashed with McMaster and had tensions with him, might see his ouster of Reince Priebus as part of sort of a larger, you know, sort of reorganization that might make it easier for him to disempower McMaster. So I'm actually not sure what the Kelly hire will mean.
All right. Well, we will definitely keep following your reporting. Great piece. Rosie Gray, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, up next, Anthony the Mooch Scaramucci is proving to be quite the shiny object for the media, and Trump probably likes that just fine. More AM Joy after the break. Welcome back to AM Joy. We are live in Los Angeles, where we've come to participate in Politicon, the ultimate convention for political junkies. I was hoping one of the headliners, newly minted White House Communications Director Anthony the Mooch Scaramucci, would drop by my panel discussion on why facts still matter, given that the administration could use a bit of help in that area. But unfortunately, the Mooch decided to bail. He canceled his scheduled appearance at Politicon. The organizers responded, quote, "At least now we don't have to worry about violating any local obscenity laws." Bump, tip your waiter. A cheeky reference, of course, to Scaramucci's NC-17 interview with The New Yorker, where he used vulgar language to describe his colleagues, now former White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus, and presidential advisor and alt-right Representative Steve Bannon, who, according to Scaramucci, is apparently a contortionist. Figure that out on your own. The interview quickly became an instant obsession with the media, which struggled to clean up Scaramucci's naughty language, as Vice News pointed out.
Anthony Scaramucci went off
in a profanity-filled, expletive-laden interview. We're talking about F-bombs.
I can't read all the words.
We can at least give you an idea.
Scaramucci said he wanted
to expletive. Deleted.
Effing kill all the leakers.
The marathon Mooch coverage came the same day that the Senate was set to vote on a pretty important thing, a health care bill that would affect 1/6 of the economy. At one point, Democratic Senator Chris Murphy tweeted, "Hey, cable news, there's actually real breaking news affecting millions of Americans happening right now. Stop covering Scaramucci for a sec." And every second spent obsessing over the Mooch is also one less second spent talking about an even bigger issue, of course, Russia's attempt to disrupt our democracy, which probably suits the Mooch and his boss just fine. Joining me now, MSNBC contributor Malcolm Nance, actor and director Rob Reiner, Gabriel Sherman, special correspondent for Vanity Fair, and Claire Atkinson, media reporter for the New York Post. And I'm going to go to you first, Claire, because you're our newbie on the panel.
Yes.
What did you make of this rollout of Anthony Scaramucci? It certainly did sort of delight the media in an odd way, even though they couldn't quote him.
Absolutely. He's manna from heaven. He's good looking. He's got the tinted glasses. He's amusing. Obviously, he loves to make headlines. I don't know if he really intended all of those expletives to hit the media airwaves when he had that interview with the New Yorker. But he certainly is straight from central casting communications director, which I'm sure Donald Trump is happy about. And he seems to have a lot of goodwill in the press. People seem to like him. Page 6 had a great story today about who is the man behind the headlines. He is getting divorced from his wife because apparently he's in love with Donald Trump. And there's quite a few intriguing snippets of information about his Italian heritage and how he built himself up from nothing. And now he's part of the hedge fund set. He's worth $200 million, and he wants to be in the spotlight, so to speak, and he's got the job he's been waiting quite some time to get. Obviously, he sold his company to be able to join the White House and had to sit around for quite a while until he got the job that he wanted. And I don't know if you allow me to show the New York Post from Friday, but we had this cover. Which Survivor. I mean, who's out next? I mean, I guess we'll see this week. But the White House has become a reality show, and it's hard to know. You have to ask yourself: is Mark Burnett behind the scenes here? Is it Big Brother, Survivor? Is it the Real World with MTV? It's hard to say these days.
It's hard to say these days. And Rob, here we are in your town. We're here in LA, and there's a sense in which the media is entertained, obviously, by Scaramucci. He is sort of, to Claire's point, it is sort of a reality show. But is that allowing the media to sort of get away from covering sort of the real thing, or can we walk and chew gum and read his expletive deleted tweets?
Well, I can tell you that Robert Mueller can. And if we're not talking about it, he's doing what he needs to do. This is a freight train that's moving down the track, and nobody's going to stop it. I don't care what you say. Somebody was saying that Scaramucci looks like an extra on the set of Wolf of Wall Street who got fired because he kept talking to Leo DiCaprio too much.
And cursing. And his divorce is in the news. Gabe Sherman, he's sort of creating a drama around himself, which, Donald Trump may like it right now. It was the Axios headline that Trump loved his quotes because, of course, he wanted Reince Priebus out too. But he hates being upstaged. At some point, does the Mooches Act get on Donald Trump's nerves?
Well, that's a classic tension. Anyone who's covered Trump will see that, this happened to Steve Bannon at one point when he was on the cover of Time magazine. Trump likes these larger-than-life personalities, and he likes infighting amongst his advisors. The problem then becomes when they outshine him and the media focuses too much on them. And I'll just, go back to something you said, Joy, and I agree. Donald Trump's advisors are not the story. I think there's a danger when he surrounds himself with these cartoonish characters that we focus on them in the media and not the larger policy questions, which this week we should point out that the Republicans tried to dismantle 1/6 of the economy with their health care bill. So, while these characters and profanity-laced rants are great copy, I think they should not be the A story in what the media focuses on.
Yeah, and Malcolm, you also do have, the idea that the communications director is supposed to try to get the White House on the same page and speaking, with one voice on the issues that Trump cares about. And the thing, to Rob's point, that Trump is the most obsessed about is this Russiagate investigation. It's the thing that scares him the most. I want you to listen to Anthony Scaramucci attempting to navigate that issue on the BBC. And I believe this was last week. Take a look. Or this week.
See, what's happening right now, which I love, is that the elites and the media establishment that want to hit the president on Russia every day, they're recognizing there's nothing to the Russian story. So here's what's going to happen.
Donald Trump is not elite.
We're going to move on.
The business side or the politics side or the inheritance side. What part of Donald Trump? Many people in the UK don't understand that.
There's so many things about the
president.
He's
a celebrity.
How about
He's
the
a billionaire.
Cheeseburgers? How about the pizza that we're...
Everyone eats cheeseburgers and pizzas. What are you talking about?
See, you're coming across a little bit elitist.
Who was that?
What you just saw there. Wow. What you just saw there is Joe Pesci in Goodfellas. And that's who this character is. He is the guy who's doing whatever the mafia boss says. He wants to be the made man. He wants to be in love with all the fathers of the mob scene. And he is going to say and do anything that makes the boss happy. Now, with this Russia investigation, the first thing that he's going to have to do is get a lawyer. Because through exposure in the White House, all the discussions that will happen about Russia, if he comes into the scheme or whatever it is, okay, he too is going to be taken under Mueller's, investigatory eye. Yeah. And he's going to have to explain that. The question is, will he be able to take the heat? Right? Is he going to walk into an empty room, right, with plastic on the floor? And is he going to go down along with Trump? Yeah. And so he wants to play this role of, of the guy who's making jokes, in the Italian restaurant. He can play it, but this is government, and this is government that fully intends to get to the bottom of this.
Yeah, and it's a good question, Claire, and I'll throw that to you in your reporting, because it does seem that if you go into the Donald Trump White House, you do have to be prepared to lawyer up and to be able to afford it. We've learned last week that the RNC is fundraising, and some of that money is winding up going to Donald Donald Trump's defense, but the people he hires, they're on their own to pay for their attorneys. Is that why we're seeing Donald Trump only? Is he tapping people with lots of wealth because he just likes to be around rich people? Or is he tapping people who can afford a criminal defense attorney to be on call?
That's a really great question. I have really no answer for it, but I think if you have wealth, then you have this automatic confidence in yourself and confidence in delivering a message and doing the president's bidding. And also, you know, Trump is about to talk about tax reform, and my rich friends happen to love that idea. And, you know, it's not surprising that he would want lots of people who are very wealthy on his team. I doubt really it's about being able to afford your own legal defense, but it's an interesting point.
Yeah, and you know, Rob, it is sort of entertaining, but also sort of disturbing. Donald Trump really does seem to be constructing sort of an authoritarian sort of fantasy land for himself, where there are generals everywhere, where he's surrounded by billionaires, where they make policy that essentially creates a sort of feudalist system where no health care if you're on Medicaid, but, you know, you don't have to have a mandate if you're rich. You know, is it frightening?
Well,
Should we be frightened by it?
You know what I think he's doing? He's trying to recreate for himself the world that he came out of in New York real estate. He's putting people around him that he feels comfortable with. And the things that he was able to get away with in New York real estate and the shady dealings and the bankruptcies and the, you know, whatever money laundering happened, you know, behind the scenes, that's fine, all well and good, and he can escape all those things and put his name on stuff. But now he's in a federal investigation. Robert Mueller doesn't care about any of that stuff.
Yeah.
This is real stuff now, and I don't care who he surrounds himself with. Scaramucci said it himself, a fish stinks from the head.
Yeah.
This guy is stinking right now, and I don't care who lawyers up and who gets in there. It's not going to matter, because there's the truth, and that will come out, and unfortunately for Donald Trump, it's not going to be, as Malcolm says, it's not going to be pretty.
It's not going to be pretty. And Gabe Sherman, you know, what Donald Trump throughout his life, when anytime he's gotten in a jam, you know, when he's had his massive bankruptcy, when he's, you know, his divorces, getting caught, everything, he's always turned to the New York tabloid press as a way to aggrandize himself. And I'll ask you and then Claire, is this an attempt, do you think, to sort of create and dazzle the New York tabloid press, to dazzle the New York Times, and to sort of rely on the backstop of the New York media to change the narrative of his presidency?
Well, if it is, it's not working, and I think this is actually some of the lesser covered news of the week. Is that, you know, Claire's big boss, Rupert Murdoch. There has been some growing daylight between Rupert Murdoch and Donald Trump. You know, this week we saw the Wall Street Journal editorial page come down very hard on Trump for the shakeup in the White House, and basically saying, yeah, you can fire as many people as you want, but the real problem is you. And I think from my sources in and around Fox World and Murdoch World, you know, there is a growing frustration that Trump is consumed and obsessed with Twitter, but is not getting his agenda through Washington. So I think if Trump is going to try to just create scandal and headlines as a way to distract, it's not going to work.
Yeah, I mean, and Claire, it is interesting to see that you held up that cover. You know, that is a cover that we probably wouldn't have been surprised to see, you know, a few months ago on the New York Daily News, on your competitor. But the New York Post has really been more reliably pro-Trump. Is there a sense inside the editorial side, not the newsroom side, that there may be an exhaustion with Trump in Murdoch world?
All I can speak to is what I read in my own paper, and I think part of what Gabe says is very true, that there has been a lot more critical stories of Donald Trump in the paper recently, and with good reason. Michael Goodwin in the editorial column described this past week as the worst week for Trump yet, and that he's in a box, and there are you know, problem after problem just piling up, and the Russia investigation, whether Jeff Sessions will be forced to resign or will resign of his own volition. I mean, the problems just go on, and as a citizen, I wonder, you know, when are we getting back to the business of learning about what's happening in the country, and how the electoral process is working, and how laws are being made. It's depressing that this circus does just continue. We're 6 months in. You would imagine that it would have calmed down by now, and we're still in a position where the circus just gets more and more crazy every week.
Yeah, and surprisingly enough, you've even had this is somebody who's been a supporter sometimes and not. Bob Vander Plaats is a big-time evangelical leader in Iowa who at first Donald Trump attacked because he supported Ted Cruz instead of him, but then he supported Trump in the election, came out and tweeted this: silence equals assent. POTUS must model and demand a higher standard. Scaramucci should be fired immediately. I mean, guys, that's not going to happen.
You know, here's the thing. You're seeing erosion, not just with the conservative press, but you're starting to see conservatives in the House and Senate start to pull away. They have never respected Donald Trump, and now they don't fear him anymore. You don't see the fear. And once you have lack of respect and lack of fear, you're going to see people moving at their own pace and ignore. Because, you know, to say Trump has a strategy of distracting, there's no strategy here. This is a man who's totally consumed with himself and self-preservation. He doesn't care about, I'm a smart Machiavellian guy, I'll do this in order for this to happen. It's all about self-aggrandizement and making himself feel better. So that's what he's doing. It's not like, I'll do this, therefore I can get this done. It's not that smart. There's just no strategy.
You're getting an amen from Malcolm Nance.
Yeah, and you know, Scaramucci's possibly one of his big problems now is that he's going to be incidentally exposed to Donald Trump and his entire world, which means now all of his finances are going to come under the exact same electron microscope of the Mueller investigation. And it doesn't matter if it had nothing to do with Russia. Crimes that are going to be found, whether they're incidental, whether they're accidental, they're going to be exposed. This investigation, which is going to be the single greatest investigation in the history of the United States, is going to rip apart the financial aspects of every person in that White House to determine if any of them were agents of a foreign intelligence agency or Moscow.
Yeah, you've been warned, Trump administration, you cannot distract with the mooch. Malcolm Nance, Rob, Gabe, and Claire will all be back. This is a great panel. And up next, the right-wing messenger taking over your local news. Stay with us.
I know Anthony personally. He's a good friend. He's unquestionably passionate and direct. That's been pretty obvious. He also has a high level of respect for media, having been a part of it himself. The bottom line is this: there's not always agreement between the White House and those covering them. That is impossible. What these changes do signal, however, is there will now be a better working relationship between the White House and the press.
Wow. That was former Trump campaign spokesman Boris Epshteyn in his new role as a chief political analyst for Sinclair Broadcast Group. Sinclair, which is owned by a wealthy Republican donor, is the largest local broadcast group in the country, the largest in the country. And its $3.9 billion purchase of Tribune Media means it could eventually project Epstein's pro-administration rhetoric to 70% of American households. In fact, Sinclair affiliates are now required to run those bottom line with Boris segments at least 9 times per week. But while one right-wing media company is expanding its power to defend Donald Trump, Breitbart is now doing its best to protect a new victim of Trump's bullying, Attorney General Jefferson Sessions, who they call a man who embodies the movement that elected Donald Trump president. Joining me now, Democratic pollster Fernand Amandi, Eric Bowler, senior writer at Share Blue, and back with me, Gabe Sherman and Claire Atkinson. So this was interesting, Fernand. These bottom line with Boris pieces in which he sort of stares to camera and says, everything is fine. Anthony Scaramucci is amazing. The media will now have a great relationship with Donald Trump. It's sort of comical, but it's also a little unnerving. What do you think?
It's not comical, Joy. This is not the Sinclair Broadcasting Group. This is the Sinister Broadcasting Group. I don't think it's any accident or coinkydink that Boris Epshteyn, a Russian accented English-speaking American, is the head of this network doing this propaganda, because that's what it is. What's next? The Moscow Minute with Vladimir Putin? You know where else this is done, Joy? This is also done in Russia, where there is no free media. They are slowly but surely and methodically implementing this. And it's not just in Sinclair. In Washington, D.C. recently, Joy, at the end of June, 105.5 FM is now broadcasting Russian state Sputnik propaganda. And this madness isn't just Fox News on steroids. It's the literal definition of fake news. And I think we need to call Sinclair Broadcasting out for what it is. This is fascism. This is happening. It's happening now. And Joy, I urge my fellow citizens watching this to wake up to what is happening in our country. Fascism is happening in our country as we speak in real time.
Yeah, I mean, Eric Bowler, I mean, these stations are required to run these Boris Epshteyn, which are just essentially White House propaganda, you know, telling people in their local broadcast news. This isn't cable news where there's lots of opinion. This is your local broadcast, local news, where you have Boris coming out and saying everything is fine, Russia, not a big problem. You know, this is not what Americans are sort of accustomed to seeing, except for sort of the pure propaganda days, maybe during World War II, you had these dispatches. That was about a war. I mean, it is odd. And the donations, if you look at the New York Times, the guy who owns Sinclair and its efforts to buy Sinclair Broadcasting, it says that some of their giving, and this is one of the sons of founder Julian Sinclair Smith, have contributed to lots of political campaigns over time. And some of their giving has been to Democrats, mostly for state and local races in Maryland. But a vast majority of their money has been funneled to Republican causes, including the Republican National Committee, a Mitt Romney fundraising committee in 2012. So these are Republican activist donors who now own TV stations that cover 70% of the country.
Yeah, I mean, this is a complete capitulation from journalism to propaganda. And what's dangerous is we're seeing a sort of permanent infrastructure for propaganda going into the future. You know, we're all obsessed with the imploding Trump White House. We have an executive branch that does not function in any way, shape, or form. That's an incredibly important story. But down the line, we have permanent propaganda infrastructure, no matter who's going to be the next president, no matter who's going to control Congress and things like that. So this is very dangerous. You know, polling data suggests people trust local news in an odd way more than national news, because a large segment of the population has been trained to be skeptical of national news, right? It's biased. It might be partisan. People kind of accept what comes over the local news as is what it is. And now we're seeing these force-carried, centralized, right-wing, pro-Trump, editorials on a daily basis. Sinclair has a history of this. If you go back to 2004, they refused their ABC affiliates to air Nightline the night Ted Koppel ran the name of U.S. dead soldiers in Iraq. They declared that was kind of un-American and anti-Bush. 6 months later, right before the election, they aired this John Kerry hit piece about his service in Vietnam. They kind of receded during the Obama years in terms of overt partisanship. But as we've seen with so many instances, Trump brings out the worst in everybody, and he has clearly brought out the worst in Sinclair. They are going off the rails, just straight up and down propaganda for local news. And that fits sort of the last piece of the puzzle, right? Right-wing media had Fox News, they had talk radio, they had the internet, and now they're grabbing local news.
Yeah, and Gabe Sherman, during the campaign, there was some talk, some rumors that there was actually a deal cut between Jared Kushner and the Sinclair Broadcast Group to get favorable campaign coverage. Boris Epshteyn gave an interview to Variety that was published this week in which he said the following. He said, despite the provocative suggestion in December from Trump administration Special Advisor Jared Kushner that Sinclair cut a deal with Trump campaign favorable coverage, there was no such arrangement known to him. So Epshteyn said, during the campaign inaugural and in the White House, no Sinclair station interview was ever seen as a layup. This is a serious journalistic organization with serious journalists. Your thoughts, Gabriel?
Well, I think what Jared Kushner, and if I remember correctly, those remarks were made in a speech. I think what he was talking about was that the Trump campaign made a deliberate decision to give access to Sinclair affiliates in local markets, especially in the swing states. And yes, if there was not an explicit quid pro quo, I think the fact that a presidential candidate would be talking to a local news outlet, I mean, the power disparity between those two is such that the local anchor and the local reporter would be, very grateful to get such a high-profile interview, and therefore, it's not a hard-hitting forum the way it would be in a national interview. So I think what the Trump campaign did, and what Jared Kushner was alluding to, was that they made a strategic decision to use Sinclair because it would be a friendly forum to go into the swing states and talk directly to the local affiliates, and that would get their message out there.
Yeah, I mean, and Claire, you work for a newspaper that's owned by Rupert Murdoch. He's a conservative. He's got international businesses, media businesses all over the world. But you just pointed out in the last segment that there's been critical coverage of Donald Trump in the Post. What do you make of this idea of creating sort of canned pro-administration canned pieces that are required to be aired in a local broadcast market. Have you ever heard of such a thing in the United States?
I haven't. I mean, I did watch a couple of segments of the Boris Bottom Line with Boris, and they seemed pretty ridiculous to me. And I'm sure the audience is pretty good at filtering out garbage as well. And I think we're going to see Sinclair move from kind of like this fringe company that owns local TV stations to a major media force. Once the Tribune deal closes, that's expected in the next couple of months, once they get FCC approval. We should also take a look at WGN, their station that they will acquire through Tribune. It's currently a cable station that airs kind of repeats of entertainment shows. I would expect, and I've heard from sources, that they want to turn that into a big general entertainment network. We've heard reports that they have talked to Bill O'Reilly, to Sean Hannity. I don't know if any of those talks come to anything, but it's clear that Sinclair wants to move from the fringes to a big, major, mainstream media organization, and we'll see what that comes with it. It seems...
And Fernand, we can expect that what that will come with it is lots of pro-Trump propaganda, I would think.
Oh, absolutely. And, I go back to the point earlier. Joe, I've said on this broadcast before that Donald Trump's presidency is a cancer on this nation. Well, with moves like this with Sinclair, we see that cancer metastasizing, Joy, in all aspects. And think about what just happened within the last 72 hours. You've had a president of the United States call for national law enforcement to engage in greater degrees of police brutality. Yesterday, Florida, the state that I live in, and you once lived in, Joy, turned over its voter rolls to this Orwellian Trump voter commission in spite of the fact that there is absolutely zero evidence of voter fraud. Look, I said it earlier, I'll say it again, and it sounds alarmist, but it's true. This is fascism happening in our country. And what can people do about it? I would suggest those that work at Sinclair that are patriotic Americans resign. If you're a broadcaster, don't put any broadcasting or advertising revenue on there. And if you're a viewer, never watch a Sinclair station again, because it's propaganda.
Yeah, and Eric Boehlert, do you see any effort out there to push back against what they're doing?
Well, yeah. I mean, I interviewed Sinclair employees, a decade ago when they were doing the John Kerry stuff, and they were humiliated. They couldn't believe what was happening. They were embarrassed to work for Sinclair. My guess is all those people are gone. Sinclair is notorious for cost cutting. Here's a quick example of why this is so important. When Greg Gianforte body slammed a reporter on the eve of his special election in Montana, every news organization in America quickly ran the audio of the confrontation, which was chilling. The Sinclair affiliate in Montana would not air the audio. They claim it couldn't be verified. The next day, they were telling their voters, their viewers in Montana, it was kind of, nobody really knew what happened. It was very confusing. He was arrested for assault. There was nothing confusing about this. This is a very specific, frightening example of how local news on the eve of a special election can change things.
Wow. Pretty scary stuff. Fernand Amandi, Eric Boehlert, Gabe Sherman, Claire Atkinson, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Thank you. And coming up, your moment of Maxine.
Ranking Member Waters, first of all, let me thank you for your service to California. Being a resident of California, I appreciate everything that you've done for the community there.
I don't want to take my time.
I also have appreciated the opportunity to meet with you
my time.
Several times.
Reclaiming my time.
When we were doing our
reclaiming my time.
The time belongs to the gentlelady from California.
Let me just say to you, thank you for your compliments about how great I am, but I don't want to waste my time on me.
She only has to tell us one time, because here on AM Joy, we are giving her all the time she needs. Joining me now is the one and only U.S. Representative of California's great 43rd District, Congresswoman Maxine Waters.
Hello, Joy. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I love being in your town. Isn't it amazing how one little turn of phrase can take over the entire internet and Twitter?
I cannot believe it. That we went viral, I think. I know it was trending, just saying reclaiming my time.
Well, to get to the substantive issue, I mean, you sent a letter to Steve Mnuchin, and this was about, asking for copies of all the pertinent financial records to the committee that may shed light on President Trump's financial transactions with and business ties to Russia, as well as his family members and associates. So you had a serious question you're trying to ask him, and he was complimenting you instead of answering the question.
Well, he was filibustering. That's what he was doing.
Yeah.
He was trying to take up my time. When you're absolutely right. I want to know about his responsibility. FinCEN is in the Treasury. They have the responsibility for collecting, analyzing all of the data that comes in from all of the financial institutions, the banks, etc. Because they have the responsibility to determine whether or not there's money laundering going on. And when they see suspicion, the banks send them the information. I want to know, has he seen anything? And if he does see it, what does he do with it? Does he turn it over to Mueller? Does he hold it? And I never got an answer to that question.
Do you believe the Treasury Secretary is stonewalling your committee?
Well, absolutely. He stonewalled me. At least he tried to. And that's why I had to say over and over again, reclaiming my time. Because he came in there determined that he was going to use up the time so that he didn't have to answer any serious questions that he did not want to answer.
Yeah. How close do you think, or do you have a window into how close the official investigation, the Mueller investigation, is getting to actual potential for corruption, money-based corruption, financial-based corruption within the Trump inner circle, and whether or not that's related to the Russiagate investigation?
Well, you know, we don't actually know how much he has accomplished. We believe in Mueller. Most of us really do. We think he's serious, that he has hired the correct people, the people who are experts in money laundering and financial transactions. We don't know exactly where he is, but we want him to stay. We don't want Trump to go around messing with him and trying to find a way to fire him as he's doing. We want him to do the work because we think he will connect the dots.
What do you think would happen in Congress, including from your colleagues on the other side of the aisle, if Donald Trump were to find a way, let's say fire Rod Rosenstein and elevate somebody who would actually fire Bob Mueller?
Well, I think that there would be a revolt. I think the Republicans even can't stand for that, and they won't stand for that. And we know that he's thinking about and trying to come up with ways by which he could get a new attorney general. The Senate has told him we're not confirming anybody. And he's even thinking about how he can use what is known as the recess appointment. But the Senate is saying we will block that also. And so I think certainly Democrats are very serious about him not being able to do this. But Republicans increasingly understand that he steps over the line when he tries to fire Mueller. And even Jeff Sessions, the Senate is saying you better not touch him. So I think they're getting serious.
And so you sent a tweet this morning, a couple tweets, but I want to look at this one. This is cut 4 for my producers. And it was a very provocative tweet that had to do with something Donald Trump said last week. He said Freddie Gray's family probably wants to know if officers will protect Trump's head when he's thrown into the back of a paddy wagon. And this, of course, referenced the really sort of shocking things that Donald Trump said in front of the Suffolk County police, sort of assembled Suffolk County police, that even the Suffolk County Police Department officially had to say, wait a minute, we're not for roughing people up and throwing them into the back of vans, which for a lot of us sort of recalled what happened to Freddie Gray.
Absolutely.
How shocked were you when you heard Donald Trump say?
I was shocked. It is totally irresponsible for the President of the United States to encourage violence by the people who are hired to protect and serve us. They didn't really like that. It's very uncomfortable for these groups, including Boy Scouts and others, that are before him, to have him say things that they think they're supposed to respond to. But they did correct that image that went out when it looked as if they were clapping when he made these statements. But here we are, a nation that has experienced police violence. And we've had unarmed young men, black men for the most part, who have been killed, who have been shot by the police. And so I know many of the police jurisdictions are trying to overcome that image, but some of them are bad apples, and they should not be encouraged. But you know, Donald Trump did this during his campaign. He encouraged people to beat up on folks who protested at his campaign operations. And so I'm not surprised, but again, totally irresponsible.
Yeah, absolutely. And you had another tweet this morning that said Mike Pence is somewhere planning an inauguration. Priebus and Spicer will lead the transition. You have been talking impeachment longer than anybody else. Do you really think that your Republican colleagues in the House would impeach Donald Trump?
I sincerely believe that the Republicans in the House really think that they're more patriotic than anybody else. And I'm going to challenge that patriotism. Will you stand up for your country, or are you going to give your career to protecting the President of the United States no matter what? In the final analysis, I do think he can step over the line. There are many lines he can step over, whether it is attempting to obstruct justice in a very profound way, or whether or not Mueller is able to connect those dots. to show that there's been money laundering, that there was collusion, and that it's all about lifting those sanctions and drilling into the Arctic with Putin.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
In the final minute we have with you, let's talk about the Democrats just for a moment. They're fielding lots of candidates. You actually starting to see a lot more challengers stepping forward. How's the party doing in terms of taking advantage of this moment? I think we have a chart that shows just how many Democrats are running for office in 2017 versus even 2015. There you can see it there all the way on the left, lots and lots of blue. How are the Democrats doing?
We're doing fine. And, you know, we've adopted a different way of dealing with our elections and saying, let's not confine it to a few states. Let's go after all of them. And also, we're going into Republican areas where we have Democrats who have never been touched because of the way that consultants guide our campaigns just to go after those who have voted recently in the last few elections or so. And those Democrats who are in Republican areas don't hear from us. So we're changing the way we do campaigning. And I think people are energized. They want to get involved. They want to run for office. And we're going to be there to help them.
All right. Maxine Waters challenging the Republicans live up to their patriotism and creating viral memes every time she says or tweets anything. We love it. We love having you on the show. Thank you very much. Follow her on Maxine Waters.
Very much.
You already follow her at Maxine Waters. And coming up at the top of the hour, new reaction to Donald Trump's new White House Chief of Staff. But up next on AM Joy, another of our faves, Rob Reiner, is coming back to talk about his great new movie, LBJ. Stay with us.